Fringilla and Francesca's robed figures are so clear. Frangello, wow. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. I know that last time I had absolutely no announcements, nothing to say, but apparently I was wrong, because later that day, Anita and Carolina of Witcher Kitchen, fan favorites here on Breakfast in Beauclair, announced that they are collaborating with CD Projekt Red, yes, the CD Projekt Red, on an official Witcher cookbook, which will include 80 recipes inspired by the continent. I'm so excited for Anita and Carolina, and I'm sure you are too. Congratulations to both of them on all of their success with working with one of the biggest game companies in the world, and for what I'm sure is going to be a fruitful and continued collaboration with the company. Pre-orders are already open for The Witcher Cookbook, an official guide to the food of the continent by Anita and Carolina through a number of retailers at Penguin Random House, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and many more. You can find the link to pre-order at this episode's show notes on breakfastinbeauclair.com or through CD Projekt Red's channels or Witcher Kitchen. I also recently appeared on an episode of The Story Tinker, which is a podcast hosted by Mindy, also in New Jersey, which covers webtoons as well as The Witcher. You can hear my thoughts in episode 207, way before we're ever going to get to it on Breakfast in Beauclair. And it's also a video podcast, so you can see the wild hand gestures that I always make behind the microphone. You can find The Story Tinker on YouTube, as well as any other podcast platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thanks again to Mindy for hosting. As for this episode, we welcome Miriam of Temeria to our hanza on Patreon. Miriam joins our producer-level patrons, Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Vangerberg Glamour Red Kite, The Original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Claire Odell, Gennady Mundilovich, Wolf Corey from the US, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Father of Bean, Silo Side Sorcerer, a Toussaint Knight, Roxas, and Jeanette of Brogolon. After this episode, patrons will receive Tracie and David's Quiz of Surprise. Find out who knows Kaer Morhen best only at patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, David from WhibbsGames and Tracie Miss Magitek call in to continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher, episode 202, Kaer Morhen. Join us as we discuss Eskel and the infamous Leshy fight, Baba Yaga and the magic number 3, successful examples of special effects, practical effects, and editing, themes of figures, dreams, longing, faith, devotion, and desperation, and how we would have changed this episode and this season. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Larson Witcher Flicks shares production updates on The Witcher Season 3. After the break, don't miss our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 202, Kaer Morhen, Part 2. When we left off, Yennefer and Fringilla had been captured by Francesca and the elves as Geralt and Ciri had returned to Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's Keep. In the next scene, Yennefer and Fringilla are brought beneath the fortress where they discover ancient paintings and runes detailing the history of the continent and the conjunction of the spheres. Francesca, Fringilla, and Yennefer share their dreams of hooded figures, and the sorceresses discover an incantation in primitive elder speech on an ancient altar. The altar opens, and the women go to meet the deathless mother. This is an interesting scene, just because I think when I was watching it, I was like, oh, I have no idea where this is going now.
Yeah.
So it was interesting as like someone who's so familiar with the books to be surprised by something that's new in the story. As Yennefer and Fringilla are walking through the cave, they're seeing these cave paintings, and it's likely that the content of these paintings is what's going to be explored in Blood Origin, which is again another cool little Easter egg for the upcoming series.
Yeah, it was cool. It's like, oh, the conjunction of the spheres. They referenced it. And Fringilla even said, the heavens roared and the realms collided.
I really like the cave paintings. It made me think of a scene in the books where an elf is painting a mural on a cave. That made me think of that, but clearly this has some more meaning behind it.
Yeah, and I think stylistically, they're really beautiful. They don't look like cave paintings that like we have in our universe, which I think is really neat just from an artistic standpoint. They're colorful, they're super geometric, and they play around with this idea of like rings and spheres, which we'll hopefully see more of in the future. And pointillism, I thought that was a really interesting touch, was just these pointillistic effects. So as they move into the cave, though, we hear about Fringilla and Francesca's dreams. Francesca's dream is that she's lost in a labyrinth of dead elven bodies, but is guided out by Ithilien and sees the sunrise on a new elven kingdom. Whereas Fringilla has a dream that Emir guides her out of her imprisonment after killing the usurper. It's kind of interesting to see the difference between the dreams that Francesca and Fringilla tell us about versus the dream that Yennefer had. Fringilla and Francesca's dreams are all about this idea of like salvation. Whereas Yennefer's is just terrible. Like she has a baby and then it gets set on fire. Like what is that supposed to mean?
Yeah.
So it's like interesting to see the discrepancy there.
Yeah. I'm like trying to think of what I felt in these moments when I was learning about their dreams, and then Yennefer didn't even describe hers to them. She was like,
no, she doesn't tell anybody,
which is also interesting, and nobody looked to press in on that. Like, hey, Yennefer, why don't you tell us your dream? They just kind of moved on from that, and she ended up not telling anybody about the dream that she had.
Yeah. Thinking about it now, I'm kind of formulating a suspicion that it has to do with their desires and where they put their faith. Fringilla, we obviously know, has a lot of faith in some sort of external force. It's often the white flame.
Yeah.
Whereas Francesca is actively searching for something external to answer her prayers. She's digging in these ruins in search of an answer. She's looking for the key to a bright elven future. Whether or not it's a shortcut, we'll see. Conversely, Yennefer is still holding on to this idea that, like, she has power. Her ability to change her own situation will come from herself and her own abilities. So I wonder if that's almost the difference, in that Yennefer isn't necessarily looking for salvation from anybody in the same way that Fringilla and Francesca are.
It's an interesting theory. I do like that. And it's interesting to think about these things, that there could be a lot more meaning to this than what's on the surface. I don't know. I like that theory.
I might be making it up. I guess we'll see.
Hey, I think it's good.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Pivot back to Francesca, Fringilla, and Yennefer, who were wandering through the woods beneath the crypt, because there's woods beneath the crypt, okay? And they discovered the doorless hut from the legends. Against Yennefer and Fringilla's warnings, Francesca recites the incantation that they found on the altar. Going through these woods, Fringilla actually tells Yennefer about the experiences that she had after the fall of the previous king, Fergus. The usurper, the one that killed Fergus, the one that banished Emir. Turns out he rounded up all the mages and put them into what she calls a playhouse, where Emir saved her. So that is actually a part of her story that Yennefer wasn't privy to. It was a nice moment between Yennefer and Fringilla because we haven't really seen them bond or have any sincerity in their relationship.
Yep.
So it was nice to kind of learn that within the context of their relationship, and then also about why Fringilla is probably the way that she is and why her devotion to the White Flame is so consuming.
Yeah. I like the Fringilla backstory. It's really cool.
I mean, ultimately, Fringilla is in Nilfgaard because of Yennefer's actions. It's really interesting to think that if Yennefer hadn't acted as brashly as she did when they were younger, just went along with the chapter's orders to send her to Nilfgaard, she would have been in that position. Maybe we'd be seeing a flipped script here.
No, that is really interesting, actually, too. That could have been Yennefer. She was supposed to go to Nilfgaard, but it was Fringilla instead. So seeing these two connect and talk about things that could even be on the back of Yennefer's mind, as Fringilla's describing all of this, that could have been her.
I think it's almost like that question of, like, had those roles been reversed and Yennefer didn't have power, like, what would have happened to her? Everything that she's done throughout her life has been building toward this accumulation of power. What happens if that was stripped from her in Nilfgaard, for example? I guess we'll find out, actually, now that I'm saying that out loud. As they're kind of walking, we get that story, and then eventually they stumble upon the house in the woods that we might have heard about from Vesemir, the woods that are probably super dangerous and you don't want to walk through and you don't want to awaken anything in there. Those woods. They find this house. Yennefer and Fringilla are a little more hesitant about this whole situation. Francesca has no hesitancies, like, our people were up there worshiping this deity. It's probably fine. And Yennefer's like, I don't know about that. This whole thing seems pretty suspect. That doesn't stop Francesca. She's committed to this. Anything for the advancement of elves.
I thought this was a very interesting scene because we see this creeping hut and it kind of references some Slavic folk of Baba Yaga. This is a creature that we haven't seen in previous iterations of the Witcher universe. It's not something that's like a monster in the books or in the games, but it is still part of this Slavic folk that a lot of these other creatures like leshies are part of. So it totally fits into the universe, and I think it was really cool to see. I was looking up some stuff about Baba Yaga because this is actually, again, I'm going back to D&D, there are references to Baba Yaga in other fantasy worlds, and that's something that you actually see in D&D. Baba Yaga is referenced multiple times. And so I did a little bit of research on it, and Francesca starts reciting this elven incantation. Behold the mother of forests, the deathless mother nesting in dreams. Turn your back to the forest, hut, hut. Turn your front to me, hut, hut. That actually is something that is in Slavic folk that people would say, turn your back to the forest, your front to me. People would say that in order for Baba Yaga's door to appear. So there would be no door, and they say that line, and that's how the door appears. So that is a straight reference to this actual like Slavic folk, which is really cool. Some other things that I learned about Baba Yaga as I was looking this up is that her house is also usually covered in skulls. That's kind of similar to the skulls that we saw in the crypt, that they have like that creepy skull altar that they had.
Yeah.
Something else about Baba Yaga is that in some tales, her house is connected with 3 riders. And so that, again, that number 3 is coming up where we have 3 mages here with 3 shared dreams. And now, you know, that's all kind of connected into this folk tale.
Yeah, I think along similar lines, that number 3, it really made me think of the 3 fates in Greek mythology. Those 3 witches that determine when somebody will die, and they all share a single eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, there's something magic about the number 3. Another thing this made me think about was the 3 witches that lived in the Velen swamps in The Witcher 3. I don't think they had quite the power as what we're seeing here, but clearly they're luring people into their woods and then doing something terrible to them.
Absolutely. And I think like with the folklore and the legend of Baba Yaga, that house is commonly said to be on chicken legs. And they did witcherify it a little bit because earlier in another scene before they go on down into the crypt, Fringilla says, they used to tell me stories when I was a child to scare me about a house on basilisk legs. So it was cool that they made that little change by still keeping the Slavic folklore, but also like making it a little bit on the continent as well. But the scene ends, Francesca recites the incantation and the hut stands up, all the lights are on and it turns to face them. And then we cut, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very scary moment that they also included in the trailers for this season. In the next scene, Geralt and Vesemir discuss raising children, the Witcher's medallions vibrate violently around the keep and on the medallion tree, and the Witchers begin to search the castle for the monster as the women hide with Ciri. Everyone's having fun, and then nobody has fun. We get again like a nice piece of dialogue between Vesemir and Geralt, where Geralt is like, I was really hoping this like rowdy teenager who I have no real relationship to would just do exactly as I told her to, and Vesemir's like, aha, you're an idiot. Geralt confides in Vesemir what actually happened in Cintra. Like he tells Vesemir, like, I was in the city, I heard it all, fire, screams, and death. The same sounds that I heard here as a boy hiding in the cellar waiting for the humans to come to us. So he's referring to, you know, what we see in Nightmare of the Wolf. It kind of alludes back to Geralt's interest and empathy for Ciri. He knows what she went through, he can empathize with it, and he wants her to feel safe in the way that he could or couldn't at the time of the sacking of Kaer Morhen. It's a nice little insight into Geralt's motivations and his intent as well, along with the relationship between Vesemir and Geralt.
Yeah, I mean, the kids in Kaer Morhen, they didn't have a good time.
To say the least, yeah.
I mean, we really saw in The Nightmare of the Wolf that very few survived their experience at Kaer Morhen, and Geralt had to experience such terrible things not just from the trials of the grasses, but also witnessing the deaths of so many fellow witchers at the hands of humans and mages that were sacking Kaer Morhen. He's been through a lot. Ciri has been through a lot too, seeing her castle getting destroyed, her family being annihilated. I think you're right. Geralt is feeling a lot of empathy for her.
I definitely think that you're right on that. Poor Ciri and Geralt have had like this childhood trauma in different ways where they've had to watch so much of their family just die. It's very sad.
100%. But yeah, so when we talk about Geralt and Vesemir and their challenges with raising children, and then Geralt and Ciri's experiences in being in those horrible situations, like it feels very full circle. They're helping each other out as best as they possibly can, which I think is all you can really expect from family and hope for from your family. In the next scene, before we actually get to what happens with the Witchers and the monster that they're going to encounter in their keep, the sorceresses wake up alone on the floor of the hut, and the robed figures from their dreams unveil themselves and begin to prey on their deepest fears and desires. This was a really cool, scary, creepy experience for me. The special effects that they used on the Deathless Mother throughout this scene, almost similarly in the way that they styled Verena in episode 1, like the Deathless Mother has her own effect, and it's really disorienting, and you kind of feel that this is happening at all times and no time at the same time, which I think is enhanced by the use of the special effects that they chose. All three of these women go through this experience alone, whereas the Deathless Mother is with all of them at the same time. So it's a pretty cool way that they wove the plot with the special effects and what they chose.
Yeah, these special effects are great. The twitching, it's so unsettling.
Oh,
they
yeah.
did that a lot with the Bruxa in the previous episode. Really well done.
Yeah, agreed. It was creepy, and this entire scene was just so chilling, and we don't really know what's going on and who is doing this to them until later. You're kind of left in a bit of mystery for a while and trying to understand what's going on with these three mages.
You know, the topic I brought up earlier, we're actually starting to see where their loyalties and desires lie, right? Like Yennefer's is with power in her own independent power, and that's what this demon preys on. For Francesca, she wants to save the elves. For Fringilla, it's almost like independent power in a way that she has not had before, and the strength of the Empire. With Fringilla, the Deathless Mother says to make your ask as a mirror. The Deathless Mother is preying on Fringilla's source of faith and of power. Fringilla says, I would rebuild our forces, strengthen our numbers. We are an empire, but the North is a league of many kingdoms. And the Deathless Mother says in response, or Emir says in response, the North is a large and unpredictable land. Even with your numbers, you'd be lost. You need friends, allies that know this land as if it were their own. And it continues by saying, you know, no kingdom of men would ally with you, but you want salvation? Then you're bringing back the wrong elf, alluding to the fact that even though Fringilla thought Yennefer was the prize, it's Francesca. We'll see that play out with Francesca's experience with Ithilien. Ithilien, you know, the Deathless Mother, gifts her the first pure elf for years, a new hope for a brighter future. And Francesca says, you know, I've been with child before, but none of them have come to term. But the Deathless Mother says, like, what if I could help you with that? What if all you need to do is ask? When Francesca starts to doubt this whole situation, the Deathless Mother preys upon her own faith in her ancestors. You know, like, your ancestors had better faith than you. Do you want to see your child live? You must live first amongst men and take Cintra. So we're kind of seeing how this creature is working. It knows what to prey upon. It knows their deepest desires. And it just so happens that Fringilla and Francesca can help each other. They just need this Deathless Mother in order to do so.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the conception of the alliance between the elves and Nilfgaard, starting here with this demonic force, really, urging them to get together. And we'll see throughout the series and the books, this alliance really leads to a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah. It's like this is how the seed was planted for Francesca and Fringilla. It was through this Deathless Mother telling them, you guys need to make this alliance. That's how the seed was planted here. And it was interesting to see that.
Yeah. The alliance between Nilfgaard and the elves is something that we don't actually see in the books. And so it is really cool to have the origin of that alliance be a part of this story and of this season. I do have opinions on how it actually happens and on the Deathless Mother as a concept, which we can probably chat about by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
However, Yennefer has no such fulfilling experience with this creature. Yennefer gets this young woman. This woman starts to prey upon her lack of power. You felt this and saw it, and you've known something is wrong, and then makes her do that little exercise again with the rock and the flower. Yennefer starts to come to terms with the fact that she has lost her powers, which we'll see, come to fruition by the conclusion of this episode. This demon preys upon that before revealing her true form and saying this ominous, ominous line that yes, denial a tasty garnish. I'm going to let you bake some more. I want your desperation crisp. You will beg me to take it from you, and I will. And it's just like, what is happening? I don't know what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's that difference in I think, path for Fringilla and Francesca versus Yennefer.
Yeah, I think this is the moment where we actually first learn that Yennefer has lost her magic. This tracks with the books. It's forbidden to use fire magic, which Yennefer uses a lot of at Sodden to turn the tide of the battle. And we're really learning that she made a great sacrifice to win that battle. We can see in the books there's another sorceress who will remain unnamed that goes through the same experience, and it's a great hindrance to her. It's a really big loss.
The thing that stood out most to me about this scene with Yennefer was that Fringilla and Francesca's robed figures are so clear. Francesca has Ithline, an elven prophet. Fringilla has Emir, the white flame of Nilfgaard dancing on the arrows of his foes, and her savior. Yennefer's figure, I'm personally just very confused by it. When I watched the episode, I didn't know who it was supposed to be. As I've looked up articles about the episode, some articles have credited this figure as a younger parallel version of Yennefer, which doesn't really feel quite right. Some have said it was a younger Toussaint, which seems more in line based on costuming and the dialogue that they have. But at that point, I'm like, well, why don't you just get Mayanna Buring?
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure who it's supposed to be. I suppose it's Toussaint, based on the fact that this woman has a very high neckline, which has always been consistent in Toussaint's costuming. She also a little bit resembles Janet from The Good Place, so make of that what you will. But that's what that costume reminds me of very much. I just didn't know who this figure was supposed to be and their relationship to Yennefer, which I think made the scene a little confusing. Hey guys, it's Late Night Alyssa. Looking up this character, the actress Carmel Laniato is credited as Violet, which honestly isn't any more clear as to who this character is within the continent or what the relationship to Yennefer is. But I did want to make sure that I looked it up and let you guys know.
And she also calls her Piglet. When I first watched this, I thought it was young Toussaint. That's what I got from it. But I'm curious why they decided to make this intentionally vague of who Yennefer's person was. I too looked it up, and this is something I talked about when I've previously talked about this episode. On the path, I talked about this too, and it's like a big question that I have. And if I could ask a question about this episode, this would be what I would ask. Like, why did they make this visitor intentionally vague for Yennefer? Is it young Toussaint? Is it young Yennefer? We don't know. And why is it that Yennefer's is not clear, but Francesca and Fringilla's are so obviously clear who is visiting them? This visitor does say one line where she says, the others were obvious. You thought you were special, but no. To me, it seems like she's also saying that. Like, yeah, these two had very clear visions, but yours wasn't. The question is why.
Yeah. I wonder if that ties back to my point earlier about Francesca and Fringilla have such clear external sources of their faith. Whereas for Yennefer, it's her own self. I guess to uncover what her desires are, they've always been internal. She's never sought out help from anybody else, for the most part, right? So what is there to really prey on? What is there to offer? Unless Yennefer realizes her lack of power. There's nothing, because Yennefer believes that she can either accomplish or gain anything that she desires on her own. So I wonder if it kind of relates to that as well, where the Deathless Mother character doesn't really know what angle to take because there's nothing for anyone external to offer to Yennefer.
That's a really good point. I also feel like when the Deathless Mother is presenting herself to Yennefer, it's a lot more overtly threatening. Yennefer is the only one that she shows her true face to. I feel like it's just a thin disguise to throw Yennefer off and to terrify her.
Yeah, the most ominous part certainly comes at the end. That quote that I pulled out, I'm going to let you bake. I want your desperation crisp. It basically alludes to what's going to happen the rest of the season, even though we don't necessarily know that now. Yennefer has not been broken just yet. we think that she has been, at this point in the series, but there's so much further for her character to go. And this Deathless Mother knows that, even if Yennefer doesn't, even if we don't. Before we continue our discussion, we're going to hand it over to Lars from Witcherflix for recent news in the Netflix show. When we come back, David, Tracie, and I will continue our discussion of Kaer Morhen.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody. The filming for Season 3 has finally started, so let's see what the Witcher production crew was up to in the past weeks. On March 31st, The Witcher has begun filming for the new season. Near the Italian lakes of Laghi di Fusine, close to the Italian-Slovenian border, the filming has started. We know that the whole family has come together again. Henry Cavill, Freya Allan, and Anya Chalotra were shooting their first scenes in Italy, in the very beautiful and snowy countryside. Moreover, Netflix revealed the official logline for Season 3. As monarchs, mages, and beasts of the continent compete to capture her, Geralt takes Cirilla of Cintra into hiding, determined to protect his newly reunited family against those who threaten to destroy it. Entrusted with Ciri's magical training, Yennefer leads them to the protected fortress of Aretusa, where she hopes to discover more about the girl's untapped powers. Instead, they discover they've landed in a battlefield of political corruption, dark magic, and treachery. They must fight back, put everything on the line, or risk losing each other forever. In the first days of April, The Witcher's European filming tour continued in Slovenia. To be more precise, in the first days of filming in Slovenia, the Witcher production crew was spotted near St. Jerome's Church on top of the Nanus Plateau, in the western part of the country. After that, the filming continued at the scenic Prejama Castle that is pretty close by. The spies at Redanian Intelligence spotted the three main characters and various sorceresses filming at Prejama Castle. This included Therica Wilson-Reed as Sabrina, Cassie Clare, who plays Philippa Eilhart, Anna Schaefer as Triss, Mariana Brewing as Tisaya, Misia Simpson, who is Francesca, and the new cast member Sofia Inga, who possibly plays another sorceress. The presence of all these sorceresses, including Philippa Eilhart, suggests that Prejama Castle could stand in for Monte Calvo, Philippa's seat and home of the Lodge of Sorceresses. The final stop of The Witcher's filming before heading back to Longcross Studios in the UK was the beautiful Krk Island in Croatia. Redanian Intelligence reported that Freya Allan was present during the filming at Zala Stara Baska Beach. What exactly they filmed is not known, but the architecture of the set looks similar to the houses made of clay in northern Africa, suggesting that Krk Island could be the Korat Desert from the Witcher book Time of Contempt. In other news, Netflix has finally confirmed the 4 directors of Season 3. First, Steven Surgic, who was already a director for Season 2 of The Witcher, is returning. He was in charge of the fan-favorite episode A Grain of Truth. The other 3 directors are Ganja Montero, who worked on brand new Cherry Flavor and The Chi, Loni Perister, whose previous work include American Horror Story or Castle Rock, and last but not least Bola Ogun, who worked on shows like Raising Dion and Lucifer before. Moreover, Redanian Intelligence reported on 2 new actors for Season 3. First, Jim Sturgeon will play Apelgut, King Demawend of Edin's Royal Messenger, who isn't the most important character in the adapted book Time of Contempt, but who has quite a significant impact on the story as a whole. Jim Sturgeon has played in productions like Young Valanda or Vigil before. The second actor, who according to Redanian Intelligence will join The Witcher Season 3, is Sean Curnow, who has appeared in The Musketeers, Doctors or Great Expectations. Unfortunately, his role is still unknown. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you all stay safe and well. We talk again in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
Hi everyone, welcome to our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Keep on listening as members of our international Hanza share their thoughts on what we're discussing in this episode.
Hey, it's Pauline from Germany. I really like the atmosphere of Kaer Morhen and the portrayal of Vesemir and his interactions with Geralt. But let's talk about the leshy in the room. I can understand the choice of Eskel's death as a piece of character development for Geralt, but I thought it quite unnecessary to kill such a relevant and loved book and game character.
Thanks to Pauline for sending in their thoughts on episode 202, Kaer Morhen. Share your thoughts on The Witcher Season 2 with our community by recording a 20-second clip with your name, country, and a comment about each episode for a future Dear Friend segment. Email your clips to greetings@breakfastandbeauclair.com or DM the podcast on social for more information. Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, Yennefer, Fringilla, and Francesca had encountered the Deathless Mother in the Doorless Hut in the woods as the threat in Kaer Morhen begins to grow. In the next scene, Geralt enters the laboratory to find the woman left with Eskel dead. He and Vesemir battle the creature only to discover it is Eskel. When Eskel attempts to kill Vesemir, Geralt makes the difficult decision to kill his brother. So this scene was, classic monster fight. It just so happens that the monster is a Witcher that we have loved in previous iterations and that we have felt conflicted about in the course of this episode. I've seen some behind the scenes with Basil, who played Eskel, and it was really cool to see the mix of special effects that they used for all of the, I almost said tentacles, branches that this leshy has. And then the practical effects that they actually used for his torso and his face. They've combined practical and visual effects so much more seamlessly in this season, and I think that Eskel's leshy is a really, really good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. SFX are incredible. I mean, we were saying tentacles, they really were a lot more like tentacles than roots.
Mm-hmm.
Leshies in European folklore are like forest spirits, sort of like man-tree hybrids. I feel like they're kind of like trickster spirits. They cause people to get lost and cause them to panic. And when you're panicked deep in the woods, you're going to make bad decisions. You're going to get more lost. That's why it's often advised to just stop moving, stay in one place. And you can calm down, think more clearly, and people can come and find you. But this is clearly a very different direction from that kind of in the back corner of your eye sort of leshy to a more overt, corrupted life form that's trying to kill things.
Yeah, the fight was very cool in itself. We get our first big fight of the episode, and it seems like Geralt's a little hesitant at first on what to do, as he's kind of processing that this leshy is his friend. And then it goes on to continue the fight, and Vesemir does, come in and help as well.
I think Geralt says when he and Ciri are down the laboratory that leshies can't reproduce, and they've been here since the conjunction. So I wonder how long that leshy has been in the woods, and has this happened to anybody else?
Yeah.
I think, the heartbreaking thing about this fight is obviously the fact that it's Eskel against his own family. I think the challenging thing about this is really that, it really is brother against brother, Vesemir and Geralt against Eskel, and they have to make that call to actually end it. When Geralt finds Eskel, Eskel says, "I knew something was wrong. I thought I could fight it. I thought you could help me." And ultimately, Geralt's the one that kills him, but not before being provoked to, because Eskel is strangling and killing Vesemir. That whole thing is just really hard, but the fight itself was very compelling. It's everything that I think we could have asked for in a Witcher fight, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, the way he does, again, the fire through the heart, which we know is one of the main ways to kill a leshy. And Geralt actually takes his weapon and does Igni on it and takes it through Leshy Eskel. And it's cool to see that. And it was kind of what we would want from a Leshy fight. And we got to see it in a unique way.
It's always really cool to see how they're bringing in the Witcher signs into this. We saw a few in episode 1. We hadn't seen Igni yet, though. So to even see it in a small application like this, and it's just basically like heat metal from D&D, and it turns bright orange and then straight through the heart.
Yep.
Like I said, it was like cookie cutter monster fight, but I think I do have a lot to say about Eskel and the direction that they took with this character.
Yeah. Same. Yeah, just that it was a cool fight. Nothing else really to add.
Yeah. Really sad that Eskel had to lose control like that, and that he was still partially there, understanding that he was hurting people, but he couldn't do anything about it.
Right. And Vesemir had given him the opportunity as well, too. They strapped him up by the chains and said, wait here. Well, it'll take us a while to figure it out, but we can do it. And that didn't happen. We'll get to talk about that more as well. But in the next scene, Yennefer wakes up in the forest alone, and thanks to the Deathless Mother, Fringilla and Francesca have aligned and are journeying to Cintra. This is also really interesting because Fringilla's fine. All of them are fine. But ultimately, Yennefer still has hesitations about what the hell just happened. Fringilla is like, no, things are great. I'm going with the elves to Cintra. We'll see you later. You did good. This is fine. Everything's fine. And Yennefer is the only one who has doubts. But she also makes an interesting note about Fringilla that we'll explore throughout the rest of the season. Fringilla says, I know my faith brought me this far. I'll see how much further it can take me. And Yennefer says, that sounded like ambition. Impossible. Fringilla cuts back, not as impossible as you finding meaning. What did you ask for? If she was really that evil, why did she let you go? We know why the Deathless Mother let Yennefer go. She needed to bake for a little bit longer. She needed to become more desperate. Whereas Fringilla and Francesca are now ready to explore the fruits of their alliance with the Deathless Mother.
Yeah, it's like they got their answers and they were ready to go. Like they're ready to move on, and like that was that, you know? I do like that Fringilla still plays into her, you know, her faith, like we've discussed multiple times this episode. She still holds on to that faith. And same thing with Francesca. They both have that. And that is a huge driving factor for their characters, even to this point in the episode.
Yeah, I think that there's a difference between them and Yennefer here. Yennefer is feeling, I think, more lost than ever, facing the fact that she doesn't have her magic anymore. She's weaker than she's ever been. Really put back to the point she was before she went to Aretuza. It seems like she does not really have faith that she's going to get back, and that she's really stuck in this cat and mouse game with the Deathless Mother now.
And I think we'll suddenly see the effects of that as well in the next scene. After all of this happens, Geralt begins to train Ciri, the remaining Witchers honor Eskel, and Yennefer desperately attempts to portal out of the forest and discovers she's lost her powers and connection to chaos. After this battle with the Leshy, Geralt has changed his mind about teaching Ciri how to fight. And as he's monologuing this to Ciri, the Witchers pour one out for Eskel and hang his medallion on the tree. So we see that ritual there. They very clumsily pour. It's a terrible pour.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you know, Yennefer is seeing that the world is changing. In accordance with Geralt's monologue, her world has drastically changed since Sodden. And we're seeing her hit a new low and a new kind of revival for her character as well.
Yeah, I really wanted to remark on that pour. They spilled so much.
They did.
They have to have a distillery somewhere in Kaer Morhen. I mean, it would make sense. They've got those laboratories. They're kind of alchemists.
Yeah.
They probably make their own alcohol there.
If they're being that liberal with their pours, it's probably like 98% water.
Pour one out for poor Eskel.
New merch.
Yeah. Another random point on that. Is this also the episode where we see the tree of medallions? Yeah, we did. Which was also cool to see all the medallion tree and even the little game Witcher medallion and all that little nod to the games, which was always cool. I loved the Witcher tree. It's a sad and somber tree, but I loved seeing it in live action.
It's a cool addition to the world. Like, that's never something that's explicitly in the books. That's something that the production added. They brought it from Nightmare of the Wolf and here as well. I think it... This is a terrible pun. It grew on me. It really did. Because I think when I first saw it, like, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But like, the more it ties back to the story and the way that it kind of services the Witchers and their place of honor and their shrine to their fallen brothers. And I quite like it.
So I have a lot of thoughts on the conclusion scenes of this particular episode that I can talk about. I've said this previously, but I think it's like a dramatic ending. But I actually like the drama of it all. Because it shows our three main characters, Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer, and it cuts between the two of them and the different things that they're going through. And it's just like a powerful moment for all three of these characters, and we see what they are going through in different ways. I especially love the way they depict Yennefer in these final moments, and she just cries out into the forest. And it's so powerful and emotional, and Anya just does a great job with it. She just shows this raw emotion from Yennefer. That's something that we never really see a lot of in the books and in the games for Yennefer. You know, we meet Yennefer as a character. She's already gone through everything, and she's a strong character, and we never get to see her struggles. And that's something that they explore a lot in this show. They explore the struggles that Yennefer is going through in season 1, and now we get to see the beginning of it in season 2. One of the things about the show that I absolutely love is the characterization of Yennefer and showing her struggles and how she became the mage that we all know and love. It didn't come easy, you know? She had to go through a lot to get there.
Absolutely. It really humanizes her. Everybody goes through struggles, and she is no exception. She goes through a lot more, I feel, than many of the other characters go through. And like you said, I really enjoy the fact that they are focusing so much of the screen time on Yennefer for this show. It's just a puzzle piece in the story that I felt was missing when I read through the books.
100% agree.
And I think it does give a different life and spin to her character. I think, like, as you said, Tracie, like, we meet Yennefer in her prime, or even has been in her prime for many, many, many decades. So to actually give her some sort of challenge and to give her an opportunity for development is, I think, a nice addition to seeing this on screen. Yennefer isn't exactly a flat character in the books, but there's very little opportunity for her to grow with the way that her stories are written and with the way that she's integrated into Geralt's arc. So it's nice for her to have her own development here. As we wrap up the episode, I'd love to hear more from you both about, like, what are your final thoughts on episode 2, Kaer Morhen?
Yeah, so to me, it sort of seemed like there was an underlying theme of desperation throughout this episode. A lot of the characters are struggling with things that they can't quite overcome. You know, Yennefer is struggling with her sacrifice at Sodden, the loss of her magic. She's desperate to get her power back. Fringilla is desperate to regain her position of power in Emir's eyes. Francesca and Philvandrel are desperate to bring the elves into a new golden age, just to keep them safe. Eskel is desperate to fight off this leshy. He had a terrible battle with it, and then he's desperate to overcome the infection that he got. Geralt is desperate to keep Ciri safe. Ciri is desperate to gain the power to seek vengeance on the Black Knight who abducted her. Lastly, Vesemir is desperate to make sure that his boys are safe and keep the practice of witcherhood alive.
Yeah. And adding to that, I think to me, this episode was more about the characters than it was the action. A lot of the things I see online is, people talking about the big action scenes in this episode. But to me, that wasn't the key takeaway, was all of the stuff that happens with Eskel and the leshy fight. To me, my takeaway was really just the dialogue and things that were happening between these characters. There's so much that you can absorb just between the conversations that all these characters have. Geralt and Vesemir have great discussions in this episode. Francesca, Philvandrel, Fringilla, Yennefer, all of their dialogue, there's so much. Even Geralt and Ciri, there's just so much good conversation and dialogue between these characters that you can really absorb in this episode. And so much stuff I picked up, not just on the first watch through, but a second and a third time. So to me, that was my key takeaway from this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, that's a consistent piece of feedback that we've gotten on every single one of Beau DeMayo's episodes, from Betrayal Moon in season 1 through Nightmare of the Wolf, and here as well. Every guest that has been on this show has, like, really complimented the dialogue on his episode specifically, which I think is really great. I think both of you have, like, really clear takeaways as well. The desperation and the theme of desperation is something that we're going to be exploring through the entire rest of the season. As you said, like, how it manifests for every single character, because it's so different and their goals are so different, and the way that they cope with desperation enhances the three-dimensionality of these characters, for sure. So it's nice to see, like, their common struggle and also how each of them react to it. That being said, I think for me, I loved seeing the origin of the alliance between Nilfgaard and the elves. As I said earlier, that's something that I think is so cool, and I love to see that, like, play out on screen because we don't have that in the books. However, I do have, like, some thoughts on the inclusion of the Deathless Mother. While I don't mind the character and I don't mind the inclusion of folklore into the story, which I think is awesome, I definitely have some concerns about the way that an external force impacts the autonomy of their character development. And we'll obviously get to talk about this specifically toward the end of the season with Francesca, Fringilla, and Yennefer. So for me, it felt like it cheapened their character development to an extent, and I'll certainly talk about this probably in episodes, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would have loved to see these characters reach these limits on their own.
100% agree with you on this as far as the Deathless Mother goes. And it's actually, again, one of the reasons why I preferred to talk about the earlier episodes of this season. The introduction was good. I mean, we talked about this. I don't mind that they add new things and interesting things to the plot of The Witcher and the story. So I liked where it was going in this episode, but as we explore it more in the later episodes, I didn't really like where it was going with the Deathless Mother. So that's why I was like, I prefer to talk about the origin of, or the beginning of it, rather than what happens later. I would agree with you in where it starts versus where it ends. And it's just not one of my favorite introductions to the plot as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think I have a whole lot to add to that.
Like, it's one of those things that I think it's so cool that they brought in Slavic folklore. The Baba Yaga stuff is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
With the way that they, like, Witcher-fied it is cool as well.
Agree.
And I wonder if there would have been a way to bring in that folklore into the plot without, I think, taking anything away from the existing characters. But that's just, like, my personal take. So, yeah. And I think the other thing that had obviously come up in this episode was Eskel. We can't kind of like not address this, I think.
Yeah.
For a little bit of, I think, of context, I don't know how like involved, for example, some of you listeners may be with the news that happens around The Witcher. So I think a couple of months into production, well before the show was released, it was already kind of leaked that something may happen to Eskel. So there was a lot of controversy around that with fans that weren't really sure what this meant. Why would they kill off a beloved character, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time, admittedly, I was a little confused as well. I was like, I don't understand the reason for that. When I actually went and saw the episode, everything happened so quickly that I personally didn't really have an opportunity to get attached to Eskel's character. When I was watching it, I actually had the thought of like, oh, Basil's really freaking great. He's doing awesome. But as a viewer, I'm not personally attached to Eskel. The reason for this change, according to Lauren Hissrich, who had spoken about this on a couple of interviews, was that, you know, if they had Lambert, Eskel, Cohen, and Bob was obviously going to get knocked off, right? I guess that they wanted to add in a little more weight for Geralt and more danger for the viewers, if I'm paraphrasing her correctly and remembering her quotes correctly. However, what I think would have been more successful for this episode and for the relationship of the Witchers, the arc of the season as a whole, might have been to allow time for viewers to get to know Eskel before ultimately killing him off, I think by the mid-season or by the end of the season, one or the other. So we can, one, see the change in his personality so that when he becomes a little more unhinged, it's noticeable for viewers, and so that we actually get time to attach ourselves to him as a character before he's killed off. Alternatively, if they did have another Witcher, I think they could have still made this plot work with a completely different Witcher, and it would have been fine, to be honest. So that's a little bit more about Eskel. I don't know if you guys had any personal thoughts on it, but that's just what I think.
Yeah, I think that the soup could have simmered a little bit longer. I'm there with you. I think I didn't have enough time to get attached to him. It was a lot of whiplash seeing him introduced in this episode and then he's gone. I think a lot of focus on the later episodes is just on remembering him, even though we didn't really have much experience with him.
I get it for the sake of this show, and there's only finite time that we can explore these characters. There was obviously a lot of reasons why this death happened, and part of it was building up what's going to happen, like the mutations with monsters and all of that stuff. So they kind of needed to do this early on. But yeah, it still doesn't excuse the fact that we don't really get to know Eskel very well in the show. And so it doesn't have the impact that I think we would want. And I think the only reason it did have such a big impact is because a lot of folks who are watching the show, ourselves included, of course, is that, you know, we have a connection to Eskel outside of the show via the games. And that's something that we can't kind of separate in some ways. It's hard to separate that. And I realize that for myself, you know. I owe a lot of my own feelings to the Witchers from the characterizations that they had through the games. And so seeing it, you know, different in this particular show was something I think a lot of people from what I've seen have shared their thoughts on. I'm like, oh, they did this to a beloved character. Well, he's beloved because of
CDPR and everything.
Yeah. But we still have to respect that because a lot of us wouldn't be into The Witcher if not for the games, you know? I'm not saying that's everybody, because there are a lot of folks who just love fantasy literature and would probably pick up The Witcher regardless. But definitely a lot of it is because of the games and the way they developed these certain characters in the games.
Yeah, absolutely. For listeners, I'll have a lot of thoughts on this as we move through the rest of the season, but I have a lot of thoughts on the villains for the season and the antagonists of this season. And I think that beyond getting the time to know Eskel or to put his death at a time that may have been more appropriate for viewers, like the mid-season or end of season, it's like there could have been a longer build-up to him becoming an antagonist if that was the case, or to any antagonist that was in the season. I think as we kind of look toward the rest of the series as a whole, there's an opportunity to focus on smaller villains that feel like the end of the world right now, but as we move forward through the season, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. The example that always comes to mind for me is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I think that we probably could have spent a lot of this season on a villain that felt very, very large now, but is minor in the course of the entire series. So I feel like that was a bit of a missed opportunity, and that could have been Eskel, for example, or another threat inside Kaer Morhen. So I think that there's a little bit of opportunity to have explored that more. But ultimately, from what we got, I think that this arc made sense in the context of where we're going for the next 6 episodes.
Yeah, I also think that having the leshy fight was something that this episode needed. Just some kind of action, some kind of climax. It was a really delicious fight to watch, I'll say that. I wish that Eskel had a little more time to build his character.
This feels like a really somber note to end on.
I know, right?
I mean, do you guys have any final thoughts on the episode? I know that we've kind of waded through some of the controversy, which, we kind of have to do. But how are you guys feeling as we kind of look toward the rest of the season at the end of episode 2?
Yeah, I would say this wasn't my favorite episode. It was a good earlier season episode. Just trying to think what other thoughts that I have as I give myself a second to process.
Right, brain empty, only Eskel.
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm agreeing with you. This is probably not my favorite episode of the season, but it lays a lot of groundwork for what's to come. And it is definitely something that gets better the second time you watch it, which in my mind, that really elevates a piece of art.
Yeah. I think my first time watching this episode, like you had said earlier, Alyssa, I didn't have time to fully process everything, as what was happening to Eskel and all this other stuff. It was a lot, and I wasn't able to fully process it. But I actually do believe this about the Witcher series as a whole. You can absolutely watch these Netflix episodes multiple times and get things out of it from several watch throughs. So I encourage anybody who might be listening to definitely, if you haven't already, give the season another watch and give yourself time to absorb a lot of these things, because a first watch through, you can have a lot of initial thoughts, you can have a lot of initial jolt reactions, but I like to sit on it a little bit more and absorb through multiple watch throughs. And I think this episode, you can get a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, just a question for you, Tracie. So this is the 3rd time now you're discussing this episode. Once with me, once for your own channel, once on the Path with Brett and Lucy.
Yes.
Is there anything that you've discovered, through all of these different discussions? Is there anything new that's come up for you every single time this is being discussed?
We definitely discussed a lot more in this recording than I have for my own channel and On the Path. Here we explored some of the deeper themes. And I think that I learned a lot about the themes, specifically from you, David, what you were saying about your final takes, the desperation theme and some of those things. I noticed them, but I didn't fully pick them up for every character, I feel like. And now I'm noticing it a lot more. And just in general, going through scene to scene, I just feel like I was able to better understand some of the conversations had between some of the characters. So yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot that I think I learned even discussing this a 3rd time. It's so funny because I think your opinions can definitely change, and I might have some initial reactions from my first watch through, but sitting down and thinking about it and discussing it more multiple times, it gives me a more practical view on a lot of the things within this episode. So I do enjoy talking about it multiple times. I don't actually mind it.
Yeah. I feel like compared to like any other like Witcher media, Breakfast in Beauclair just feels like a slow-moving safari discussion of like, look what's over there.
Yeah.
We're gonna go like 5 feet ahead.
Yeah.
Look what's over there.
But I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely very different, I think.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting just to hear like how your thoughts and your reflections on a piece of media, as you both have said, like can change and develop with those rewatches.
Yeah, I'm always a lot more critical of things like the first time, but then as I get through it a few times, I'm like, oh, you know what? There's a lot more to understand from it. And it's okay to have a change in opinions on things.
So that is it for our show today. Tracie, David, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. So where can people find you both, and is there anything that our community can help you with, or anything that you'd like to share with them?
You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/MissMagitek. I stream RPGs and D&D. I also have a YouTube channel where I do record Witcher videos. I am trying to go through the Witcher books, but I've been very slow to go through them, just because like when you have a day job, it's hard to actually, I don't know how you do it, Alyssa.
Just
how you
pain.
find time
Pain
to,
and
like,
sleeplessness.
Yeah, it's so much. Yeah, so like I'm still working on finding my current balance of like work and then doing content on the side, but I do like to upload things to my YouTube channel when I have time. So if you want to check out my youtube.com/MissMagitek, where I upload a lot of cool Witcher stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not super active on social media, but you can follow me at WhibbsGames, that's WHIBBS Games, on Twitter, and you can check out my itch page, which has a couple of my games. That's itch.io/WhibbsGames. And I'd also just like to promote the game Inscription, which features a leshy. And I don't want to give away too much. It's a game best experience blind, but if you like card games, if you like spooky themes, if you like leshies, you're going to like Inscription.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Again, next episode, join us as we discuss The Witcher Season 2, Episode 3, What is Lost? Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint music by Larson Witcherflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Filter Media. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Edinburgh, Glamorai, Red Kite, the original Roach, Conrary's Cat, Libby, Claire O'Dell, Jen D. Mendelovich, Wolf Corey from the US, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, father of Bean, Silas Hype Sorcerer, Toussaint Knight, Roxas, Jeanette of Brooklyn, and Miriam of Temeria. Special thanks to Tracie and David for joining us for this episode, and our international Hanza for their support.